As I said, I'm Dr. Susie Davies, and I set up a charity, Papaya, 6 years ago. And really, my story is that I was working at Bristol University as a GP with students in 2018 and 2019. And I just became really acutely aware of the mental health crisis in young adults during that time. I was seeing students every day with anxiety, depression, low mood, insomnia, just a vast array of mental health problems, lots of self-harm. And I really just started to get really curious as to why these young adults why they were struggling so much with their mental health. And lots of them didn't really have a reason. They didn't have any obvious trauma. There hadn't been problems at home. They'd done really well at school. Many of them were from affluent Bristol affluent families, gone to Bristol. And I just couldn't pinpoint why they were struggling so much with their mental health. So I got really curious and I just started asking them more and more questions. And the theme that came up time and time again was that they had excessive use of technology in adolescence. And now, so often I would start uncovering really deep social media habits or gaming habits that really was the one thing that I could pinpoint as to why they were feeling often really, really distressed. There was a young man I met who was failing his maths degree, and I was trying to work out why he was failing, what was going wrong. He was obviously a really bright chap, and it turned out that he just never left his bedroom. So I was like, well, why aren't you going out? Why aren't you seeing friends? And I thought he was going to say he was too busy studying, but then I managed to sort of get it out of him that actually he was spending 18, 20 hours a day gaming on his Xbox. He was absolutely exhausted, not sleeping, and had become a profound sort of gaming addict. And that was his root problem. Or a young girl who had really bad insomnia. She was telling me she needed extensions for her essays. She thought she had ADHD. And on the surface, it really looked like she did have ADHD. But when I spent time sort of asking her really about her tech use, it turned out she was scrolling on her phone all night long, got a couple of hours sleep early in the morning, woke up exhausted, so sat in bed and scrolled, would sort of limp to the library in the middle of the afternoon, try and write essays, but couldn't concentrate because she was just checking her phone, and was on this repeat cycle day in, day out. And that was just that's just to name a few. Every day there was someone I could probably really attribute their mental health problems to their tech experience, along with other things. And at the same moment, my eldest daughter was 10, and she was asking me for a smartphone. I think she was in year 6, and it was that moment where everyone was getting a phone and going to senior school. And I just had this epiphany moment that I didn't really think that this was the best thing for her. I read a really interesting article in The Atlantic called "A Smartphone's Ruining a Generation." So it was almost one of the first articles that came out looking at the mental health problems. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is it. This is what's causing my Bristol students to struggle so much. This is why they're so different to the sort of students I imagined and remembered. And actually, I don't want my daughter to have a smartphone. So I went to the pub with a couple of other mums on a kind of school night out. By the end of the night, I'd got a couple of them to agree not to give their daughters smartphones. And very quickly, we set up Papaya, a charity that mainly works in Bristol, but educating parents and children as to the harm of sort of excessive tech. Some of the harm. So I was so excited when I caught wind of smartphone-free childhood. I think I saw one of the earliest kind of media posts about this viral WhatsApp group, and I was instantly on it. I reached out to Claire and Daisy, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. I've been trying to do this for years and not got very far. So actually, I think it's just an amazing kind of moment that we're at, that there's this amazing community, that there's so much momentum behind the smartphone-free childhood movement, so many people wanting to delay the first smartphone. That's not the only option I'm going to give tonight. I'm going to really look at all the different things that you might want to do as parents, but obviously that is one of our main messages. So I'm going to just look a little bit now at some of the harms of using social media and smartphones and some of the impacts on our children. So this is something I run workshops in schools for children. So I've been in a primary school today, and this is probably one of the most meaningful things that I share with the children. I get them to sort of guess how much time the average 12-year-old spends online every day. And some of them guess 8 hours and some of them only 1 hour. But the average, according to Ofcom, is 3 hours, 48 minutes a day online for a 12-year-old. But the key really, I don't think, is that daily average. It's how it adds up. So if you spend a week on that average, that adds up to 21 hours a week, 21 and a half hours. But if you do that for a year, that's 52 days of the year, which is actually more than their summer holiday. It doesn't count when they're asleep. So actually it's more like 80 days. And then I say, if you started online at the age of 10 and you kept doing 3 hours, 48 minutes a day until you were 80, you're going to spend 11 years of your life online, or more like 18 years when you count the sleep. And I just ask them, how do you feel about that? And then we also calculate their average based on their average screen time. So if you're on an hour a day, that would come to just over 2 years of your life. But actually, if you're on 8 hours a day, you're looking at 23 years. And I get them just to reflect on how they think about that. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How do they feel? And it was really interesting. So today I had 2 children who both told me they were on average 8 hours a day. One of them said, I really don't mind. I love it. I'm going to keep going. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm not here to judge. But the other one was like, oh, miss, that's horrific. Absolutely don't want to spend that much time online. I am cutting down my screen time. So, it's lovely when you get those moments where children really engage and they go home like really motivated to reduce their screen time, because I want them to feel empowered that they're part of this too. I think as parents, we've got the biggest piece of the pie. We have a huge responsibility, but I think for children to be thinking about this as well is really helpful, and hopefully make it easier for their parents at home. Because obviously if they go home and ask for screen time, or my top tip is to not ask your parents for a phone, hopefully then actually you're making things a little bit easier for parents, because you're giving that same message to everyone. So why? And again, this is what I look at in our workshops. Why is it that we are all so drawn to technology? Why is it that there's just such a power, isn't there, about our phones? I got my first smartphone when my when my youngest child was born. That was 12 years ago now. And at first, I think I just liked having a nice camera and a shiny new phone. But bit by bit, I downloaded apps and I put on my work email and I downloaded some social media, and then the banking app went on. And before you know it, you've got this little computer in your pocket that's constantly distracting you. I might be thinking, oh, I can pay that bill quickly when I'm in a queue, or I can quickly do that work email. But actually, it just means that we're online and so much more distracted, and even more so for our kids and the impact that persuasive tech has on them. So just thinking a little bit about why is it that we're so drawn to our phones? It's not just the convenience. It's the fact that tech companies have done an absolute brilliant job at hijacking our dopamine reward pathways. So these are circuits in the brain that reward us for good behavior almost. They are prehistoric and were designed to keep the human race procreating and safe and alive. But what tech companies have done is they've kind of hijacked dopamine, which is our feel-good hormone that's released in anticipation of reward. When we imagine something good is going to happen, they've hijacked this with social media and games, so that when we anticipate that reward of a like or a follower, or when you anticipate the reward of going up a level on a game or doing well, you get a spike of dopamine, which makes you feel good. And the brain learns from that spike of dopamine and wants to come back for more. So actually, this dopamine motivates us to do things that aren't necessarily always in our best interests. And more in modern life, dopamine is often the root cause of many addictions, of gambling, and actually it isn't something that's necessarily training us or teaching us to do the right thing. And this is particularly what social media companies have tapped into. And so young people who haven't developed all their brain pathways yet are very, very easily kind of drawn into these dopamine reward cycles. And if they grow up with tech from a young age, their brain is almost hardwired to crave dopamine. And one of the quickest and easiest ways to get it is to check on social media or to play on a game, because it releases so much dopamine. So just a few little quotes to sort of emphasize this. The smartphone has become the modern day hypodermic needle. Now that might sound a bit extreme, but actually there was a child in my workshop today who actually said when they're feeling sad, they would go to their screen to kind of distract them from their pain in the real world. And again, it's a bit like why people turn to drugs, isn't it? To take away their pain. And I think this child just articulated it so well, that their screen was where they went to when they were upset. And really, again, that's not teaching them to process their emotions well. It's teaching them to push them away and to distract themselves with technology. Whilst what we want our young people to do is to process that pain in a positive way and learn something from it, not just to distract themselves with a screen. And again, the nature of technology makes us all vulnerable to overconsumption. I don't know anyone who hasn't found themselves scrolling on social media for more time than they meant, or go onto their phone to look for an email and ended up, checking the news app. I had to delete the news app. I did it last January. It's the only New Year's resolution I have ever managed to keep, but I think I downloaded it during COVID. And I just got into that habit of checking the news, checking those, do you remember the daily COVID graphs? And it's a habit that then after sort of COVID settled down, I just was in the habit of checking the news app, doom scrolling through the news in a really sort of negative way. And so last January, I deleted it from my phone, and it's just been fantastic because it's just not there to distract me anymore. And it's the same, I've got Instagram sort of for Papaya, but I have to delete it every weekend just so that I'm not distracted by it when my kids are around. So it's not just our children that are vulnerable to persuasive tech. I think all of us, if we allow it, can spend more time online than we mean to. And really all tech companies want is all of our time and our attention. But I think they particularly want young people's time and attention, because actually if they create a gamer or if they create a social media addict in a young person, they've got a customer for life, haven't they? They've got someone who's going to overconsume and really struggle to break that habit as they get older. So I really think they aggressively target young people with algorithms, with ways to draw them in, because they want our young people online. They're not thinking about their best interests or what they should be doing. They're just trying to draw them in to their persuasive tech. So thinking a little bit about how this evolved, well, Facebook was started in 2002. I think it all started quite nicely with the sharing of photos, and I remember being so excited to find some old school friends on it. But really everything changed in 2009 when they introduced the like button and started using algorithms to curate our feed. At the same time, Twitter introduced the retweets, which caused absolute havoc on Twitter. And then they started using push notifications as well. And so suddenly technology was, from 2009 onwards, wasn't this passive thing that we could enjoy. They were proactively trying to push content and push content towards us that was more likely to make us engage. And actually that's got more and more complicated. There's so many different features now, aren't there? There's streaks on Snapchat, there's your autoplays on YouTube, there's notifications, but all these things are there to try and draw us into technology and make us vulnerable to that dopamine pathway that keeps us hooked in for longer. And again, another major change was the introduction of the front-facing camera and the selfie. I can remember, before the selfie, we didn't used to do it. It's become so normal, hasn't it, to post a photo of ourselves in a nice place and pop it on social media. But that's a whole new cultural shift since 2013 that just didn't exist before then, but has really, really sort of encouraged that use of social media for validation and connection. So this is a study that's quite old now, but it's one of the first ones that when I was starting Papaya, I picked up in 2019. And I think it just shows that the evidence has been beginning to grow over the last 4 or 5 years. But this study just found a consistent relationship between higher smartphone use and depression, anxiety, high perceived stress, and poor sleep in young people. It was a correlational study, but it was just one of the first ones that was beginning to come out to show that there was a problem, although there's a lot more evidence coming up now. And I'm sure many of you have heard Jonathan Haidt speak or read his book, but with his permission, I'm using a couple of his graphs because I think they're really powerful. And I've taken the data that is relevant to the UK. But this just shows an increase in self-harm since 2010 in girls of 78% and boys of 104%, and really just showing that that's relates to the dramatic rise of the ownership of smartphones in young people. And the orange line is not brilliant, but I've superimposed the percentage ownership of smartphones sort of shooting up at the same time, just to show that actually as more and more young people have got smartphones, more and more of them have suffered with anxiety, with self-harm as a kind of proxy for mental health problems, as the sort of tip of the iceberg of mental health problems. And again, this stat is one of the most shocking ones, that in the last decade, there have been 70% less accidents outside, but a 93% increase in self-harm. And again, I think it just really shows as young people have stopped playing, have stopped taking risks, have lost that play-based childhood, and instead been inside on screens. It's had such a dramatic impact on their well-being. And it was quite funny, I was speaking to some parents in Clifton today, and in Clifton, where I live in Bristol, there's a rock slide that really is notorious. But actually, when my kids were little, they used to hurtle down this rock slide, and you would hear the occasional story of someone breaking their leg on it. It wasn't great, but everyone sort of let their kids do it. And actually, I asked these parents today, a kind of decade, their kids are probably 10 years younger than mine, you know, who lets their children do the rock slide? And actually it's gone completely out of fashion. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't wasn't the safest thing to do in the local area, but it gave them that sense of risk and adventure. And really, as they're losing that, as they're losing the time outside, we're seeing a massive increase in self-harm. And as a doctor, I would just say it's so much easier to mend broken bones than it is to mentor young people who are having a mental health crisis. And as a parent, as what, you know, that's one of the hardest things to watch a child suffer who's suffering with their mental health. And often parents just say to me they would do anything they could to reverse the clock, to do things differently so that they didn't have to go through, or their child didn't have to go through what they're going through now. So this is depression levels in the UK versus time on social media. And you can just see that girls who are spending more than 5 hours a day online have a 40% risk of clinically significant depression. So that's just massive, isn't it? 40% of young girls spending 5 hours plus a day online have that risk of depression. And that's really, really high. It's almost 1 in 2. It's less for boys, it's more like 15%, but we'll talk a bit later about how they're affected differently. And obviously, for children spending no time online, there's still a risk of depression at around 10%, but it's going up dramatically, and you know, correlationally with the amount of time they're spending online. And it really, really does feel like there's a really strong link with time online and the likelihood of mental health problems. So why is this? What is it about time online that can be so damaging for young people? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about online comparison and self-esteem, and how actually spending on time online is really detrimental to their developing of their own sense of self. It increases social isolation and loneliness, which is something I saw a lot in my students. Then there's the kind of more direct negative effects, cyberbullying, grooming, and sort of inappropriate content. And then thinking about what they're losing out on. What are they not doing if they're spending 5 hours, 6 hours a day online? What are they missing out of in their childhood? And also thinking about their sleep, that actually that's a massive one in terms of why well-being is affected. So just looking at online comparison. So this is a graph again from Jonathan Haidt that just shows that from 2010, the percentage of boys and girls feeling satisfied with themselves has gone down dramatically from sort of 70% down to about 55, 60%. That young people are no longer feeling happy with how they look. And actually I say all the time to my patients, I say it's hard to feel happy if you don't like yourself. So actually liking yourself, believing in yourself, having a positive self-regard really is the foundation for good mental health. It's so, so important. But what happens when young people are spending lots of time online is they're looking at other people's perfect, curated lives and feeling less good about themselves. If you're at a secondary school, there might be 200 children there, and in that 200 children, there'll always be someone who's prettier, there'll always be someone who's thinner, there'll always be someone who's more intelligent, more popular, better at sport. You're never going to win if you compare yourself in every area. But you will probably know their backstory. You might know that the really pretty girl actually isn't very nice, or you might know that the really sporty person is having a difficult time at home. You know the backstory, you know the reality, and actually it's just a much more realistic comparison. But if you compare yourself with those people online, all you see is their perfect curated online image, which might look so much better than the real thing. There was an influencer who went to a North Bristol IKEA. She just took some flowers and a bathrobe, and she posed in a couple of in the rooms, and she posted on Instagram that she was on this amazing holiday in Hawaii, and people were fooled by her, and she did it just to show how easy it is to portray a different self online. Or I don't know, like me, I might have occasionally in the past posted the odd kind of photo online of us looking like we're having a nice time as a family on a holiday, but knowing full well that everyone had been screaming the minute before, and I'd had to kind of whip everyone into place for this photo. And actually just that need or that desire to portray this better self, when the reality, if you'd taken the photo a few seconds earlier, would have been of everyone looking horrendous and sort of, fighting with each other. But it's so easy, isn't it? I think we all forget it is so easy to post a happy, perfect looking photo. You add a filter, you change the backdrop, and your life can look perfect, when the reality is so, so different. But this is causing absolutely huge problems to young people, because 10, 11, 12-year-olds, say even 15 or 16-year-olds, don't understand about the backstory. All they see is that other people look more perfect with them, and they feel dissatisfied about themselves, and they're not learning to like themselves for who they are. They're looking to external validation. They're looking to social media platforms to feel good about themselves. And actually, that's not a reliable place to look for your liking, for your well-being, because the only reliable person who can always be there for you to like you is yourself. And actually, I think young people aren't going on that journey with themselves. They're doing that journey online, and they're learning that likes and validation online makes them feel good. And so they're seeking that out, rather than doing the work that really needs to be done in adolescence to kind of learn who you are and to learn to like yourself more. So I think this is a really key point in why young people are struggling with their well-being as they get older. And I think there's a time lag as well, I would say. Often, you eat a piece of chocolate cake and you don't instantly get fat. You probably have to eat chocolate cake for, a couple of months for people to suddenly say, oh, you look well. And it's the same with social media, but I'd say the time lag is more like 4 years of spending time online to seeing a really obvious impact on well-being. It's gradual, but I think young people or parents can say, oh, my child's on social media, but they're fine, it doesn't bother them, it doesn't affect them. But at that moment, they probably are fine, but what's happening is they're not accumulating those skills and the things that they need, and the problems are actually a little bit further down the line. So loneliness. So social media was sold to us, wasn't it? It promised to connect us. It promised that we would never be alone again. We would have friends 24/7 around the globe. But I think this was just a complete lie. What social media's done is it's kept us apart as a society. I met students who didn't have a single friend at university. They said they would hide away in their bedsits or in their student flats, creep out to make a cup of tea and a piece of toast at night because they didn't want to bump into anyone, and they go back to their room and watch their lectures online in the day because they were so scared of meeting people, and they only knew how to connect with people online. They could have had thousands of friends at Bristol, but no one they knew in person. And this study again is from 2018, but it's just such a powerful one that 16 to 24-year-olds are the loneliest group in society. There's a correlation with the more friends they had online and the more likely they were to feel lonely. So I think, again, we need to fight really hard to keep our young people connecting with each other, to keep them having face-to-face friendships, to keep them being able to relate, because actually loneliness is just so toxic. It's so bad for well-being. It's so bad for mental health. And yet young people, they really are spending many of their relationships are formed online and primarily are online, but that doesn't fulfill, I think, the human need that we have to connect with each other. So pornography and what are they seeing? So this is a whole talk in itself, which I'm not going to go into, but the 94% of children are exposed to pornography by the age of 14. And the average first age of exposure is 12 whilst doing their homework. So there's just this huge, huge problem that now porn is just one click away. And I'm not talking about soft porn or, naughty naked bits in a movie. This is hardcore internet pornography. It's incredibly damaging for young people in terms of their own self-esteem, but also how they view sex and their expectations. A lot of it is really, really violent. And I think, again, one of our main aims as parents has to be to protect our boys and girls from watching this stuff. I had a 18-year-old who I saw recently who actually had post-traumatic stress disorder from watching porn aged 8. And she said to me, I just can't unsee what I've seen. She spent most of her young years without any internet restrictions. Her parents were out, and she just spent hours watching horrific pornography that's left her completely scarred and unable to move forward. So yeah, there's a huge amount more that I could say about this, but just to this is one of the things that we really can proactively try and do to protect our children from seeing as much as possible and for as long as possible. So again, some of the direct negative effects, cyberbullying and mental health. So 1 in 5 children are bullied online, and of those, 24% will self-harm as a result, but only 13% will have the confidence to delete the app. And in my workshops, I tell the story. I say I was actually cyberbullied for the first time recently. So I had put a post on Instagram and I'd missed an apostrophe, and a stranger just sent me the most horrific message I've ever received, sort of calling me horrendous names and telling me he was going to bully me forever, sort of type thing, until I got my apostrophe right. And I just say to the students, what do you think I should do? Should I respond to this person? Should I change my post? And it just generates a great discussion about the fact that actually, no, I ignored this man, I blocked him, I have left the apostrophe out, I've left my typo because I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of changing it, but actually that I can be empowered, that I didn't need to come under that abuse, that I can block him. I'm actually tempted to send him a message and thank him for his post, but actually now his message, because actually now I'm using him as a case study and a story, and hundreds of children are getting to open up about their experience of cyberbullying thanks to mine, because I hadn't really had any. But actually it really helps the kids think about their experiences, and particularly WhatsApp is really, really toxic. I'm hearing from young people and from teachers so many problems on the class, but the group WhatsApp for class years 5 and 6 becoming a really toxic place where young people are being bullied, they're being left out, they're being ostracized. And I think just at that age, 10, 11, 12, they haven't got that forward planning or thinking skills to think, if I write this message, how is it going to make the other person feel? What's it going to look like? What's the impact going to be? They just send it in that impulsive way that we know our children, definitely mine might have. I've had a little bit of that today. So I just think actually WhatsApp is seen as the most benign social media, but actually it can be incredibly damaging. It's causing a huge amount of problems. And again, it's teaching them that dopamine pathway, because if they receive, 200 messages and hundreds of emojis and thumbs up, it's still training them. They're still getting that dopamine hit every time they check their messages and see more messages, and creating those neuronal pathways, making them more vulnerable to social media as they get older. So sleep is a massive one. So preteens are losing the equivalent of 1 night's sleep per night, and 73% of teenagers take their phone to bed with them. So obviously, most of you will know about the blue light, that the blue light of technology can trick our brains into thinking it's daytime. But I think for a lot of young people, it's more than that. It's actually just the distraction of all those notifications. If they've got their phone under their pillow and their phone's going off all night long, it's going to stop them sleeping. It's going to keep them awake. And actually, I say, my daughter used to have a hamster in her bedroom, and she went through a period of insomnia, and I said, I'm sure it's the hamster, and she kept swearing blind to me. She's like, no, mummy, the hamster's really placid, it doesn't keep me up awake at night. And then one night I had to sleep in her room, I can't remember why, but I slept next to this hamster, and it was on the wheel all night long, spinning around, and I didn't get a wink sleep. And I was like, oh my goodness, this hamster has to go. Not literally, but out of the bedroom. I didn't euthanize the hamster, don't worry. It just got demoted into the bathroom, and suddenly my daughter could sleep again. And I think it's like that. If you've got a phone in your bedroom, it is going to distract them. It's going to keep them awake. They think they need to be on the group chat overnight, but actually everything, there's no reason a child needs a phone in their bedroom. There's no emergency. There's absolutely nothing that needs to wake them up in the nighttime. So really, again, when I speak to parents of older children, once they've had the phones in their room, they find it really hard to have it taken away. But obviously, if you're delaying, it's not a problem. But if your child has got a phone, really, it's so important to keep that phone out of the bedroom and help them sleep, which is the foundation of good mental health. So concentration, the average concentration span has gone down 25% since 2000. It's now 8.25 seconds, less than that of a goldfish. And they've called the effect the TikTok brain. And it's particularly watching short form video. So watching YouTube shorts and TikTok that are just, they're on average about 8 seconds. They're so entertaining. They're really funny, but they train the brain to be constantly stimulated, that you don't need to concentrate, that you get that hit of dopamine straight away. And then it makes it much harder to read a book or to enjoy something, where it's a much slower journey to enjoyment, but much more rewarding in the long term. So again, just to really think about what they're consuming and the impact it has on their concentration. So just a quick note on gaming. So obviously, lots and lots of young people game, lots of them game within healthy habits, within healthy boundaries, but most young people in the UK are gaming. This says 3/4 of 5 to 15-year-olds. I feel like it's more than that. Again, in my workshops, nearly every child will have an Xbox or a Nintendo when I ask them. But 3 to 4% of gamers develop a gaming disorder. So that's where the gaming becomes habitual. They become addicted. They find it hard to stop, and it stops them doing things that are good for them. So it's actually having a really negative impact on life. I've got patients who haven't left their bedrooms since lockdown because they developed gaming disorders, particularly during lockdown, stopped going to school, and now really can't leave their homes because they're such avid gamers. If your child does develop a gaming disorder, it is absolutely all consuming. I once joined a kind of Facebook group for parents of children with a gaming disorder as part of my research, and the horror stories of these parents just saying, oh my goodness, I bought them, the games console for their 10th birthday, and I just wish I could throw it out. It's ruined their life. So it's not to be all down on gaming. It's just to really, really think about putting those time restrictions in so that they can game, but to really stop them gaming excessively, and to make sure they're doing other stuff. So my son does have an Xbox. He's allowed an hour at the weekends, and he had some friends over for a play date. And I was meant to be taking them to the park to play footy golf. And actually it just poured with rain. I mean, it was absolutely heavens opened. So the boys went off, did their hour of Xboxing, and then I have forgotten the password. So they were begging me for more time, but I was like, oh, can't give you more time, boys. I'm so sorry. I've forgotten the password. And actually what they did is they went off, they found an old balloon, and they ended up playing a game of keepy uppies for, you know, a good 2, maybe 3 hours. I could hear them roaring with laughter. They created a set of rules, and actually they were just having so much fun. And at the end, 2 of the boys said to me, you know, thank you so much. I've had the best play date ever. Thank you for taking away the Xbox. All they did was play with a balloon. So once you take away the devices, you give them the chance to be creative and keep their imagination going. This is one of my favorite quotes from Jonathan Haidt's book. We have overprotected our children in the real world whilst underprotecting them online. And I think that says it all, doesn't it? In so many ways, what's happened in the last decade is we've wanted to wrap our kids up in cotton wool. We've wanted to make sure they don't break bones or fall off the rock slide or get abducted. But actually in that, they've had a lot more time inside on devices where often they've come across content that's really negative and damaging for them. So that is the end of the problems. What I want to do now is look at solutions and look at what we can do as parents, how we can work together. So I promise you this is a little bit more upbeat. So I'm going to just present this before we go into breakout rooms. So just having a think about my top tips. Well, really, my number 1 tip is delay the smartphone for as long as possible, ideally 14 plus. And really not to do that on your own, but to find other people to do it with you. But if your child already has a phone, I still think there's a huge scope for putting in healthy boundaries and keeping them safe online. So I don't want anyone to feel judged or that their child's got a phone, they've made a mistake. I want everyone to feel there's something that you can do as a parent or carer here tonight to make a difference to your child's well-being. So I think it's really important that actually any change that we make is a positive one, as long as it's in the right direction. So for parents whose children don't already have a phone, so obviously this is the smartphone-free childhood movement. It's about delaying the smartphone, but it's about finding other parents to do it with you. It's about having the conversation with other parents, not doing it on your own, joining your local school WhatsApp group with smartphone-free childhood to get that community going and to realize that you're not on your own, that there are other parents doing the same thing. I think it's incredibly important to model those good screen time habits at home, to be really mindful of our own screen use. So if I see a child with an obesity problem at work, I'll say to the family, as a family, you need to go on a diet. You can't just look at the child who's overweight and say you can't have any chocolate cake. Everyone needs to change how they're eating. And it's the same with screens. I don't think we can just say to our kids, oh, well, you can't have a screen, but it's okay for me to be on it all the time. I think we all need to do this together. And certainly families that are modeling good tech habits, I think, have a lot less problems with their kids and their own tech use. Because what our children see when we're on our phones is they see that the phone is the most important thing. It kind of gives it that hierarchy, that extra status. And then obviously children want it. They see us distracted by phones. They see them as really important. And that just creates this kind of desire in them to have a phone too. And I think if we don't give phones that attention in our own homes, our children have got that chance to not want one as much or to not see them as so important. And I think that has a huge impact on our young people. So if you don't want to get a smartphone, you can get a basic phone. So here's some Nokias. This is like the first phone I ever had when I got a phone at university a long time ago. But they were great. You could phone people, you could text. It was a little bit annoying, but actually there was no access to the internet. And there are, obviously there's lots of different options, but to think about getting your child a basic phone so that you can access them, so that you can know where they are, but without that access to the internet. Now, these are just a few of the arguments that sort of people make for why they can't delay the smartphone, and just looking a little bit about them. So the idea that everyone else in my child's class has got a phone, I don't want them to be left out. And again, I think this is why this movement is so important, because none of us want our children to be left out. None of us want them to be the only one. But if we can gather other parents and do it together, we really can change the culture. We can shift the culture and make a massive difference. think it's hard for families where parents are living apart, but actually there are other ways you can help your child communicate with the other parent when you're not together. Thinking about using an iPad for FaceTime, thinking about them having access to a phone just for those phone calls, either on your own or a separate one, but it's not their phone. It literally is just to contact the other parent, and to use a basic phone. It doesn't always have to be FaceTime. You can still use a GoHenry card or a debit card to buy bus tickets and train tickets. They don't have to have a smartphone. Tracking is an interesting one. So you can use an AirTag if you want to track them. But really, I say that I don't track my children. I want them to believe they're safe and that I trust them. We live in inner city Bristol. My son disappeared for an hour and a half yesterday. He didn't come home from school. He'd been at a cricket match. He does have a phone, he has a basic phone. It was obviously off, couldn't get hold of him. And actually, I chose not to worry. I thought, wow, he's just been delayed. I probably should have phoned the school. I was at work, my husband was dealing with it. But actually, he turned up, the bus had broken down. He got home absolutely fine. It wasn't a problem. But I was actually not worried that I couldn't track him, because I thought, look, there's nowhere really he could have gone to. He'll turn up. And he did, and it was all fine. So I don't track, but you might feel really differently about that. I understand why and the benefits of tracking. I just want us to encourage our children to believe they're safe, because actually if we grow up making them feel that we need to know where they are every second of the day, it can make them feel anxious and unsafe in the world. And then the issue of a stripped back iPhone. I mean, it can be a reasonable compromise, but you have to be absolutely on the front foot. So you can take the internet, you can take the App Store off an iPhone, you can just have messages and calls on it. But every time the phone goes through an iOS upgrade, you might find that those features come back on. Kids are super clever at getting around anything you try to do to a phone to strip it back. They can download, they can download VPNs, they can delete the parent control software you've put on. So it's better than nothing, but you certainly might run into all sorts of problems. And children can also then constantly ask you to download the latest app, because actually their phone has got the capacity to do it. You might find yourself coming under a lot more pressure for that thing they really want, that they really want Snapchat. They've got a basic phone, they can't have it. But even if they've got a stripped back iPhone, you could, with a few adjustments, add it for them. So you might find you're coming under a lot more pressure. So just a few top tips on if you are delaying your first phone. Well, how do you tell your child? What do you do? Because actually, I think it's really important. This is a really big deal for our kids. If it's a kind of rite of passage, they're going to get their first smartphone either on their 10th birthday or when they go to secondary school. But actually, if we are delaying, what do we need to do? Well, I think it's so important to listen to our children and validate their feelings. Let's hear what they've got to say, because they're going to have really strong feelings about this. They might be really angry, they might be upset, but just to acknowledge how they're feeling. But actually, my two things I would say is it's not never, it's just not yet. You're not telling them they're never going to have a smartphone. It's just you feel it's in their best interest to wait until they're that bit older and ready for it. And then actually, just because everyone else has one doesn't mean it's the best thing. That more and more evidence is coming out that actually it may not be in your best interest to have a smartphone, and that's why we're delaying. I've got a friend of mine who I gave a talk in her school, and actually she'd given her eldest a smartphone and it had been a complete disaster. And then for her younger son, she was actually choosing to delay the phone, and she just, difficult because they've done different things for different children, but she just said, we've learned so much since our eldest, we're not going to make the same mistake again. And they've now got 40% of the year group, her son's in year 5, to delay the first phone together. So they've got a really strong community core now delaying their first phone, and she's feeling really positive about it. So if your child already does have a smartphone, what are the things that you can do to make it safer? Or when, in the future they have one, what can you do? I think it's really important to set screen time limits. So to try and avoid that addictive potential, you can very easily on a phone set screen time limits and set downtime. Now they can get around it. They can do all sorts of clever things like reset the clock on an iPhone so they get around the screen time limits. They can delete and reload apps. so that it gives them more time. So if they delete an app and reload it, the clock starts again. There's lots of things they can do, but at least you're trying, just to be watching their screen time. You can add extra parental control apps so that you can monitor them more closely. And again, this is helpful, but it is not the total answer. And again, unless you change the settings, they can actually delete the parental control app and download it onto their phone. So I had a parent who said, oh, why is my parent control app always coming up as red, tampered with? And actually it did turn out that her son was just deleting the app and reloading it when he wanted to get around it. So kids are clever. And as parents, we just have to be on the front foot. But we can help their phone be less distracting, and we can all do this to our phones. We can get a flip cover so that we can't see it. You can delete or hide apps, so you can put social media off the homepage. I give all my the students I see, the children I see, I give them a challenge to delete their favorite app for 24 hours, just to show them that they can live without TikTok, they can live without Instagram. Many of them can't imagine doing it. They're only 10 or 11, but they can't even think of deleting TikTok for 24 hours because they've already got such a dependence on it. But just to encourage to delete apps, to turn the phone off when you're not using it, and keep it out of sight. The evidence is if we can see our phones, we will be distracted by them, we'll be drawn to them. So we have to have them switched off and out of sight for them not to be having an impact on us. Again, as families, thinking about making these screen-free spaces, so trying to create boundaries around tech use, so no screens at meal times or in bed, trying not to multi-screen, just trying to create spaces where you can be together as a family without the distraction of screens. And then even if they've got a smartphone, you can still delay social media, ideally till they're 16, or if they've got social media, it's not easy, but you can delete it and start again if it's not having a positive impact on your child. So age-appropriate apps. So all these apps, apart from one, 13 as a minimum age limit. So WhatsApp recently sadly came down to 13, Instagram, TikTok, they're all 13, but that's 13 with parental consent. So children don't have a right to these apps when they get to 13. And really the age limit is just there for data protection. They host a huge amount of content and algorithmic content that is not appropriate for young teens to be seeing. You can obviously bypass the age restrictions just by putting a fake birthday on it. So any young person just can put any birthday on and access any social media content. There's nothing stopping them. The red flame in the corner, that's Tinder. That's got 18 as an age limit. But again, I always say to parents, watch out if you see the red flame on your kid's phone, they've downloaded Tinder or maybe even something worse. But, you know, really, all these things are with parental consent. So as a parent, you can say, actually, just because you're 13 doesn't mean I think you're ready for these apps. We're choosing to wait. And I think it's important to feel really empowered that you can do that, and that's okay. So here is sort of my stepwise progression. So thinking about delaying the first smartphone, but instead getting a basic phone instead. Then moving on to at 14 plus, considering a smartphone with strict controls on it and lots of supervision. At 16 plus, thinking about a cautious trial of social media, setting it to private so that strangers can't contact them, and putting time limits on it. And then moving to having greater responsibility and freedom online. And really, I think phone use needs to be a bit like training your child in driving a car. We don't just give our kids the key to our car and say, off you go down the motorway, have fun. We train them, don't we? You have to pay for driving lessons. We take them out. They have to pass a theory test. And as they get better and when they're ready, they pass a test and then they're allowed to drive a car. And I think we need to be looking at phones in a similar way. But actually, is our child ready? Are they mature enough? Is the access they've got working? And if it's not, do you need to go back a step so you can go back down the ladder? If things aren't working, if your child is misusing the privileges they've got, it's okay to be unpopular and go back down the ladder. I say that the biggest mistake that we made was we gave my 16-year-old, she had TikTok for a little while, only 20 minutes a day to watch on the bus. She wasn't posting anything, it was in private mode. And I just noticed a decrease in her well-being. She was about 15 at the time. And one day I just said, right, show me the feed that you're watching on TikTok. I want to see what you're watching. And actually, I just saw that she was watching a load of rubbish. I thought, I do not want her head being filled with this for 20 minutes a day. So there and then I just said, right, we're deleting this. I don't think it's doing you any good. So I deleted TikTok off her phone. She screamed and shouted for about 30 minutes. I was not popular, but she has never asked for it back. That was a year ago. She's doing her GCSEs now. She's concentrating. She's working really hard. And there was just such a shift when we deleted TikTok. Even those 20 minutes seemed to have such a negative impact on her. So we went back up the ladder, and I think that's okay. And it's probably one of the best things that we've done. And even though it wasn't pretty at the time, I've got absolutely no regrets. And I don't think my daughter has either. And now at 16, she does say she's actually grateful that we delayed her first smartphone. It took 6 years for her to thank us, but she now can see that it's been good for her and we've done the right thing. So you have to wait as parents. It's delayed gratification parenting, isn't it? You have to put so much in and wait years and years till you get anything back. But 6 years, and I got to thank you for that. And so it's worth waiting for those moments, and it's worth hanging in there. So as parents, it takes just about 25% of a group of people to switch the norm, to change the minority in a group. So if you can get 25% of your class or your year group together to delay the smartphone, you're going to completely change the group dynamic of the year group and make it much, much easier for others to delay the first phone. Now, if I haven't persuaded you already, this just to look at this graph. So this is just from Sapien Labs, looking at the age that children got their first smartphone and how their mental health results, or how happy they felt, sort of on the y-axis going up. And it just shows that the later they got the first phone, the more likely that boys and girls were to feel happy about themselves. And we've talked a lot about girls and the impact of social media, but just to say, I think for boys, the problem with smartphones, as I've mentioned, is pornography and the fact that they're retreating to an online world with gaming. Whilst for girls, I think they're much more impacted by the effect of social media on their self-esteem. So I think the impact is very different, but you can see for both boys and girls, the later they got their first phone, the more likely they were to feel happy. And really, that's a powerful thing to think about as a parent, isn't it? That actually that one simple step by delaying the first phone can have such a huge difference on their well-being, and that every year you delay, the more likely they are to feel happier. And again, as a parent, that's what we want more than anything else, isn't it? We want our children to be happy. And actually, that I do think at the moment in society, the most powerful thing we can probably have an influence over is when we give them their phone. We can't change, or we can't do as much as we would like about climate change, or we might feel powerless with things going on in government. We might feel powerless with some of the financial things going on, but actually we have got power over this one area. It's not perfect, but it's something that we can change, and it's something that can make a huge difference to young people's well-being and their mental health. So what can we do? Well, really, this is about the call to action. How can we make a difference? Well, I think it's all about having that conversation, talking to your children, talking to other parents, talking to your child's school about coming together to delay the first smartphone, joining Smartphone Free Childhood if you're not a member already. If you go onto their website, you can find then your local WhatsApp group for your region, and you can set up or join a school-based group and then encourage other parents to join too. And really the idea is to connect parents together, to work together to help delay the first smartphone, but also to work with schools. And Smartphone Free Childhood are also working at sort of lobbying the government to change policy there as well in lots and lots of areas. But really to get involved in that movement, it's a really exciting moment. You can also, on my website at Papaya, I've put up a sort of safer internet pledge just so there's something that parents whose children have already got a smartphone can do. And that's really about not having phones in bedrooms at night and putting parental control safety things on the phone. So it's not the answer, but it's just those little steps that we can take all together as a community to keep our children safer. So what are the next steps if you want to sort of work with your school? So this is from the Smartphone Free Parent Pact, the idea that what you can do is find some other parents to form a working party, and then as this working group you can engage your parent community, start writing to heads, and again on their website there's brilliant pre-written letters that you can use for your school. I don't know how many of you have filled out the survey, or if you've got a survey going around. It's something that we've done a huge amount in Bristol, got a huge amount of responses on the survey to just see what else everyone else is doing. But I'd really encourage you to set up a simple survey to be sharing that around. Encourage your school to put it on their newsletter so that you can get a gauge what other people are doing. And then once you've sort of engaged your community, thinking about creating a pact together, the idea that you would send out a sort of WhatsApp pact to say, we're going to delay the first phone. You can either do that every year, so get everyone to sign up to delay a phone for a year, or you can say, let's delay till the end of primary school, or you can set up a pact to delay to 14. But your working group, your school community, to think about what's most appropriate and what you think is going to work. You're going to go for the big win, or you're going to go for a little win and keep going every year. But to be really thinking about sharing those packs and getting as many parents as possible to sign up with you. And then again, this is just some of the examples of the packs that you might want to use. So this is just, you can take this, it's from their website, but thinking about waiting until your child is 14, not having social media, and then you can add the details of your name and your year group. And so creating something that you can share online with other parents, and then having a communal place, having it maybe on a Google form or a WhatsApp, so that you can actually then collect all the information and share. Say we've got 30 parents in year 6 signed up for this, celebrate the success, celebrate how many of you have signed up, and then encourage other people to do so. So again, this is a little bit on the Safer Internet Pledge. It's not the answer, but if every child who had a smartphone in the country followed these, our children would be a lot happier and safer. But this is very much just a kind of plan B. So being committed to discussing tech use and online harm as a family, keeping phones out of the bedroom at night, which is the absolute biggest thing that we can do for our children, and then thinking about filters, screen times, and parental control apps to try and keep them safe. But again, if these 3 things, they're not perfect, but they do make a difference, particularly the phones not in the bedroom at night. And really, just to finish before we try and do some breakout rooms, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And I think we just need to acknowledge that as a society, we've done all sorts of things that we look back on and think, oh my goodness, I can't believe we did that. We used to send children up chimneys and down mines. We used to send them into factories. We didn't educate them. We thought that smoking was good for pregnant women because it was good to have a small baby. There's all sorts of things that we've done as a society that we've actually looked back on and gone, oh my goodness, that was a mistake. And it took someone to stand up and change it. And I think we're at this tipping point in society at the moment where actually we're recognizing that there are problems with the smartphone on young people, that it's not good for their well-being. But we're at this moment when actually we can't change what's happened to the teens before our children. We can't change what's happened in the past, but we really, really can make a difference moving forward. We don't have to continue on this trajectory. We can change it. We can change the next chapter. We can change our tech use for our own children, but actually as we make a change, that has a ripple effect on our community, and we can make a difference to more and more people. And actually, I'm really excited. I really hope that over the next year or 2, that there's a massive societal shift in when children are getting phones and what access they have to social media. And I'm really hoping that they get to have their childhood back and get to play more.